And Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif spoke in Washington, D.C. today before he meets with President Obama. This is what he had to say about drone strikes in his country.
The use of drones is not only a continued violation of our territorial integrity, but also detrimental to our resolve and efforts at eliminating terrorism from our country.
Joining me now to discuss the findings of the reports and the implications of these drone strikes in Yemen as well as Pakistan is Robert Naiman. He's the policy director at Just Foreign Policy. Robert, thank you so much for joining me. Can you go into a little bit more detail about some of the revelations from these two reports? Was anything new? Was anything a bombshell revelation?
Well, it's a bombshell that two major human rights groups that, are known by everybody in Washington, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, which are cited by U.S. officials all the time, U.S. officials and members of Congress, when talking about crimes of official enemies. So, United States wants to talk about Iran or Syria or some other country that they're putting a target on. They would leap to quote Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. There's no question that these are credible sources. These internationally recognized, U.S. recognized human rights groups are accusing the United States of committing war crimes with its drone strike policy and documenting specific incidents that are recognized internationally to be war crimes. So, for example, in the summary that you just gave, talking about so-called secondary strikes, where a target is hit, civilians gather, or unknown people gather, and unknown people are assumed to be civilians unless proved otherwise. Others gather to help the wounded, and then there's a second strike. That is a war crime. That is a war crime regardless of what else is true. It's if it happened in Afghanistan, it would be a war crime. So regardless of claims about, the 2001 authorization for the use of military force, does it apply to Pakistan? That's all irrelevant if you document that the CIA is conducting secondary strikes. And there is a made-up rule in Washington that international law doesn't apply to the CIA, and if something is done by the CIA in a covert operation, then the ordinary rules don't apply. Of course, the
Now, Robert, let me stop you right there because you had brought up a very interesting point, which is the idea of war crimes. Realistically, do you think anyone will actually be held accountable for these things that have happened in Yemen, in Pakistan, and in other countries?
Well, there's a lot of ways to hold somebody accountable. I do not believe it's likely that top U.S. officials will go to The Hague. After all, we saw it during, in all the war crimes that were committed in Iraq and Afghanistan, no U.S. officials were ever held to account. Somebody who's going to bet on this, they wouldn't bet that that's going to happen. But there's other ways to hold somebody accountable. The first thing is stop the crime. And that's something that we could do. We could force the United States government to answer on the record, does the United States conduct secondary strikes? And will the United States promise not to conduct secondary strikes in the future? And then will they be held accountable to that promise? Congress is key. For 10 years, Congress has essentially conducted no effective oversight of the policy. We've seen a few episodes where members of Congress spoke up. For example, when John Brennan was nominated to head the CIA, Senator Ron Wyden, other senators, Senator Rand Paul, used that opportunity to force some scrutiny of the drone strike policy.
And at the same time, you have President Obama in his State of the Union speech, in a May speech, saying that he will provide that type of transparency that you and also these human rights advocate groups are hoping for. However, let me play devil's advocate here. A recent Economist article shed light on a surprising discovery. Sophia Khan, she's a school administrator from Islamabad, found that many tribesmen from tribal regions actually support drone strikes. Also, one survey in 2009 found that 52% of these people actually say that drone strikes are accurate, and 60% say that these drone strikes actually weaken militant groups. So what is your reaction to that? I mean, obviously not everyone is against drone strikes. Is there a way to use drone strikes in a way that is politically or otherwise correct?
Well, so it's really crucial. These things aren't necessarily contradictory. It's really crucial that the key issue here is that this policy is operating outside of scrutiny, and there's a gap between the official story of the policy and what independent groups, journalists, human rights groups are documenting is taking place. If you look at the tally of the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, since 2004, something like 20% of those killed by CIA drone strikes in Pakistan have been civilians, and that's a conservative count. That's like naming people, this person was killed, and we document that that person was a civilian. So if that's true, then drone strikes are not the magic, super precise weapon that never kills civilians, as U.S. officials have claimed. That doesn't mean that sometimes the people are killed. The people killed are top-level terrorists.
And that is a very good point that you make. We're going to have to see how this meeting that's happening tomorrow between President Obama and Prime Minister Sharif actually plays out. Thank you so much for weighing in, Robert Naiman, Policy Director at Just Foreign Policy.